What's up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of Real Spit from a Gangsta Gone Legit. Today we have my man Christen White. What's up, brother?
Peace. A pleasure. Man. Thank you for this.
Thank you, man, for blessing me and being on this platform, man. This is funny how quickly time changes, man. Like,
absolutely.
I was just on your platform, Listen to Learn, and look at that. A few months later, here I am doing my own thing with Real Spit.
Yes.
And I'm glad that we could finally get together, man, and have this conversation.
Absolutely.
So let's start off, man. Christen White. Who are you? Who's Christen White? Let us know. But take us back to where Christen White came off the porch.
Christen White's many things. I came off the porch probably around the age of 12 and a half, 13. Prior to that, I was living with my dad. We grew up in many different neighborhoods. For a lot of years, I grew up on Calumet Street over by Mission Hill, not in the projects itself. From there, we stayed about maybe 6 years, I think it was. My dad and my stepmom had their own little struggles, and when they did, my dad would typically move in with whatever girlfriend he met at that moment. So we found ourselves moving around very often when we were children. At the age of 13, my dad sat me down and he told me flat out that he couldn't afford me anymore, so that I had to leave. So I was given two options. I could either move in with my biological mother, who I just met a month before that, or I could move in with my Uncle Ray and Aunt Gloria, who lived on Wambach Street over off of Humboldt Avenue. And I chose to live with my uncle and aunt because it was still Massachusetts. At least I would still be in a familiar neighborhood. And I just met my mom, and there was no way I was going to move in with a woman I literally had only known for about a month and a half.
Oh, wow, yeah.
So I moved in with my uncle and aunt, and I often describe it as one of the biggest culture shocks of my life. Bigger than walking into Shirley Mack's or the Hill for the first time. And the reason is I grew up in an environment. My household was full of trauma. I grew up being sexually abused from about the ages of 3.5 to about the ages of 12.5. I was neglected often. I was physically abused often. So my mindset was already well prepared for when I did step off that porch. So I moved in with my uncle and aunt, and they're both pastors. I came from a household that had no morals, run by an iron fist, to a household that loved me. And I did not know how to deal with healthy love. At that point in my life, I didn't even want healthy love. I needed the abnormal in order to feel normal.
So, is that how you got involved with hanging with the street gangs? And
100%. 100%. And the way it evolved for me was, I had so much pent-up anger and rage at my abusers that by the time I was introduced to the street life, I gained love, validation, attention, a sense of belonging through the violence. The more violent you were, the more you were loved.
And what gang are we talking about? Who are you affiliated with?
I'm not affiliated with anybody, but I grew up in the area of Humboldt Avenue.
Okay. What led you to prison?
Choices from amongst very few options. My first time that I was arrested, I was 13. I was actually 12 and a half. I was going to Medford High School. This is right. 12 to 13 was a year of many transitions. I was attending Medford High School. I had always been very bright, very intelligent. I was double promoted. I never saw kindergarten. I went from pre-K to first grade. So I was always a year younger than my classmates. And so I was in 9th grade. I was 12 years old, and there was a race riot. I was going to a school called Medford High, and there was a cop that was hitting on my sister. So I ran over, I jumped on the cop, and I ended up being charged with disorderly conduct. That was my first brush with the system. Okay. After that, now I'm on Humboldt Ave. Fast forward, I'm 13, going on 14 now. And I got caught up in a lot of the typical circumstances, selling drugs, holding guns, which led to obviously coming into contact with detectives much often. And from there, I found myself going to DYS, and it was the snowball effect. After that, there was no stopping it until I eventually turned my life around.
So when you went to DYS, that didn't stop you from seeing prison? That didn't, like, you didn't change once you went in that system?
There was a part of me that wanted to go through those steps. See, it's a little bit different now as it was back then. Back then, this was like getting your driver's license. This was like graduating from high school. I wanted to go through those. I wanted to be looked at by the people who showed me love, that he could be loved at every level.
That's deep.
He wasn't just in the streets and we knew he was violent, so we loved him. He was in prison and held himself down, so we can love him in a new way. I wanted to be loved in new ways all around the street life aspect.
So you felt that going to prison you were gonna find a love that you were missing out here in the real world?
Partly. A part of it was the people were going to prison all around me. So this was normal. And you hear stories about guys that go to prison and they're stand-up. Guys that go to prison and they're not stand-up. And I knew I didn't, and I saw the difference in how they were treated in prison and when they came home. And I knew I didn't want to be treated like the people who were not stand-up.
So you were one of the guys who would stand up when you were in prison?
I mean, that's for other people to judge, but I mean, I would like to think so, yes.
Okay, all right. Man, you really give me a lot to think about here. I wasn't prepared to hear you say that you wanted this lifestyle, that you know, and
I wanted ultimately, and I feel like this might fit a lot, I wanted to be accepted. I wanted what every child deserved.
Absolutely.
I wanted to be accepted. I wanted examples of how to grow myself. I wanted to be loved. I wanted affection to be shown to me. I wanted so many things that my caregivers simply didn't give me. And now, in retrospect, I can say it was because it wasn't given to them. But as a child looking at them, it was basically like, fuck y'all.
Right. So you kind of took that as, I don't want to be around them no more.
Yeah.
I'm going to start my new family, which is
absolutely
my homies on Humble.
Absolutely. And by the time, and what I often tell people is by the time I was 13, my mind was so far gone mentally. I had already been through so much stuff.
Right.
So mainstream society was not going to accept me for how I was, but the streets would. Gotcha. So because the streets accepted me, I was going to give my all to it.
So when you finally got to prison, how much time did you end up doing in state prison?
So I've done 3 state sentences and 3 county sentences. Okay. The least ranging from about 6 months in South Bay to the last and final time, which I received 10 years for possession of a firearm.
10 years.
So all in all, I've done 17 years in DYS, state prison, county prison, and mental institutions.
Mental institutions. So let's talk about that a little bit. You were also in mental institutions, and what was that for?
I would understand it now as cries for attention, but in terms of how it was looked at, it would be looked at as a suicide attempt. It would be, and I want to be clear, I look at being on Humboldt Ave for all those years as a form of slow suicide.
I agree with you. Anytime you're in a lifestyle
where death is an outcome,
death is imminent.
Yes.
It really is a suicidal move.
Yeah.
I agree with that. But we don't when we're doing it, we're not looking at it like that. So I'm glad that you put clarity on that.
Absolutely.
And you talked about
absolutely.
that. Because mental health is very serious, and we're gonna actually talk about that a little further on in this interview, because I want to bring that up to where we are today, because you make a great point of discussing mental health. I've heard you talk about it before, so I want to get into that. But before I do, I want to take it back to one more question about the prison system. So you did 10 years was your last bid. So
I served 8 years, 9 months of that 10 years. Yes.
That's 10 years. Okay. Now, what made you change?
I knew I was several things. And I don't even look at it like I changed. I look at it like I found new ways to give other things the same energy I was giving the streets. I don't believe fundamentally we change it all. We expend our energy differently once we have new options opened up to us. I always knew I was worth something. But I always allowed others to tell me what that worth was. When I began to define my own worth, I naturally started shying away from the street life because I wanted life now. I didn't want death anymore.
Okay, I get it. So you got to a point where you didn't allow others to validate you anymore.
Absolutely.
Okay, that's big. That's what a lot of us have to, we have to get to that point.
I'll never forget it. And this was in prison. And first of all, the mental health services in prison are a joke.
Right.
And primarily because so many men and women are coming in with real intense trauma, and trauma work is not addressed inside institutions.
Right.
And it's not a written rule, but it's an unwritten rule. And I never forget, I wrote a letter to the director of treatment, and I said, look, I was in Old Colony, and at this time, Old Colony was transitioning into a more of a mental health institution.
Okay.
And I saw that the squeaky wheels got the grease. The people cutting up, the people swallowing razors, the people throwing shit at the doors, they got the attention. But they weren't really harming anybody.
Right.
But then I thought of my own situation, and I wanted, so let me bring back, and I'll get right back to that.
Okay, that's fine.
I often talk a lot about my own patterns. And my pattern when I would go to jail was I would read every book in the world. I wasn't much big on the workout. I worked out a little bit. I stayed in shape. But I would read. I would self-teach. I would do all that. What I didn't realize is that I wasn't really growing because I was only bouncing things off of myself. And my filters were already distorted. So I started realizing this pattern that I had. I would go to prison, I would read, I would write, I would do the same exact pattern every single time I would get locked up. And within that pattern, I always said I was never coming back. But I always came back. Always came back. Until this last and final time. And the difference was I spotted that pattern. And I said, that's what I have to address, that pattern. And when I began to address that pattern, it made me address myself differently. Whereas before, I wouldn't ask somebody for help. Now I said, if I want this and asking for help is going to get me there, then I'm going to ask for help this time. And I wrote the director of treatment a letter, and I was like, this is what I've noticed about myself when I come to prison. I do this, and that. And then I go home and I cause real harm to real people. I come back to prison, I do this pattern, I get out, and I cause real harm to real people. And I don't want to do that anymore. Can you help me in any way?
And so you started seeking mental health professionals in the real world when you got out.
I've been seeking professional help since I was 18. And the way that happened it started in Shirley Max. I was 18, going on 19. This was just when Shirley Max was opening up and they were moving. It was the green side, gray side. Guys were coming from Walpole. I was in Old Colony at the time, and at that time it was a level 5, which they considered a maximum. I had got lugged. I got into a fight. I got lugged to Shirley Max. They weren't taking people at the pole. They wanted to fill the max up. And so I go to the max. And I'll never forget, I was in the visiting room. The night before that, I was talking to my cousin on the phone, and she was telling me about a family retreat that had happened. And in this family retreat, my aunt exposed the sexual abuse that went on when they were younger. She exposed it. And when she did, all of the brothers and sisters tied into it and were encouraged enough to say it happened to me too. And so when I heard about that, it made me wonder for the first time ever if the things that I had gone through as a child played a role in how I thought today. Because before that, I only saw my life as normal. That's it. That was just the cards I was dealt. I needed to deal with those, whatever form they came in.
Okay.
But when I started thinking about maybe this had an effect on my mind and my actions, I thought about it. And I wrote my aunt a letter. And at this time, me and my aunt had major conflict. My aunt is very Christian, very in your face with it at this time. And that was the last thing that I needed. And so I wrote the letter detailing what had happened to me, some of the incidences I had gone through, when the abuse started, how it made me feel. Like, I mean, I was in the cell crying, all of that. I hadn't cried over things like this before. I only cried like if a friend got murdered and so I mailed the letter out, and she never responded, but my uncle came to see me the following week, and I was in the visiting room, and I'll never forget, he asked me about it, and I started telling him about it, and the tears were rolling down my face, and I didn't even notice that they were. Now, mind you, this is 99, 2000. This was, you know, if men aren't supposed to cry right now, you definitely weren't supposed to cry then.
Right.
And you definitely weren't supposed to cry in prison.
Right.
But something changed. Everybody in that visiting room, and these are convicted murderers and assaulters and armed robbers and all of that, came up to me, and they were like, "White boy." They used to call me white boy. They were like, "White boy, what's going on?" Because in their mind, somebody was bothering me. That's the automatic thinking. So in their mind, they wanted a target. And I told them, I'm like, "No, I'm good. You know, this is a personal matter and all of that." But when I saw the love that they gave to that sort of scenario, it began to shift my understanding of love only coming from the violence of the streets itself.
Wow.
And that began my mental health journey.
So you had to fix how you were thinking by seeking a counselor, and that happened to deal with mental health, and that's how you were able to get rid of the violence and the way that you thought of every time you got out that you wanted to hurt someone, and you would.
Yeah.
Right.
In a way, but I never directly looked at the end result. I always because that was when I was 18.
Right.
My last and final sentence, I got out when I was 35. So there's still more than a decade in between where I'm going through the shits.
Right.
That was the beginning of the journey.
Okay.
Because what ended up happening is I actually ended up becoming more violent because I was so open. I was a raw wound walking around dealing with things that I never even thought to look within about.
So you said that was between you were 18 and then you didn't really change until you were 35.
Well, the change was beginning the whole time.
Constantly, right.
The change was happening throughout the whole process, even when I was still doing, it's an upward spiral. You're going up and coming down at the exact same time.
Got you.
That's growth.
Absolutely. So where are you today?
Today, I have successfully been able to manage my depression whenever it shows up. The anxiety, I was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, complex post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, antisocial personality disorder.
Really?
Yes, and which 80% of convicts or inmates typically are. For the
Before you go further, explain that a little bit. So let the people know what that is.
So antisocial personality disorder would be typically spotted by you going against society's norms and not caring about it. That's the best general way.
80% of us go through that if we were incarcerated.
80% are diagnosed. It's a spectrum. 80% are diagnosed as antisocial personality, and 20% are diagnosed as sociopaths.
Okay. And you were diagnosed as
antisocial personality.
Okay. And I kind of find that hard to believe, because does that have anything to do with you being like you talking to others and because you do that so well, like you constantly give advice, you talk to people. So wouldn't antisocial mean you're against that?
Well, no, because clinically antisocial is not the same thing as what you would read in like Webster's.
Okay.
It's very different, because hustlers have great social skills if they're taken from you.
Right.
That's the antisocial clinically.
Okay. Got you. So today, you have your own what is it, a podcast?
Yep.
And it's to
Listening to learn. Yep.
Listening to learn. How did that come about?
It came about. So when I came home the last and final time, I've been home about 5 years and 4 months.
5 years. Okay.
Yes. So just to bring this part of the story in, because it ties into everything that I do now.
Mm-hmm.
When I went to prison for the firearm, my son's mom was 8.5 months pregnant.
Okay.
2 weeks later, I'm on 52A status in Old Colony. He's born. I saw him twice, once when he was 10 days old, once when he was 14 days old.
Okay.
And then I saw him twice when he was 2 years old. His mom and boyfriend were fighting, so she came to visit, which I'm thankful for. Let them fight if that's the case.
Right.
I didn't see him again until he was turning 9 when I went into the pre-release.
Okay.
I didn't know. The only thing that I did not know coming out of prison was what kind of dad would I be. That was the only thing that I didn't. I knew I was never coming back. That was clear to me.
Never coming back to prison?
Absolutely.
Good.
Never coming back. I knew that.
So you made your mind up.
Yes.
On the last
around year 7, I knew that I would never come back in these doors. I mean, protection of family, things like that. You know, sometimes something like that could happen.
Right.
But never in a situation where I'm standing on the corner of Humboldt and Homestead with jums in my mouth,
Right.
a gun on my waist, come arrest me. No.
Right. Yeah, that's not
Ever.
happening no more. I got
Ever.
you.
And so what ended up happening was, when I came home, I was an active dad right away. Active. And thankfully, my son allowed me to be a dad, because he did not have to let that happen.
Absolutely. He was how old when you came home?
He was turning 9.
Turning 9. Okay. And so that brings us to where all over the city of Boston, there were these posters on poles and mailboxes.
Absolutely.
And storefronts.
A poor man's campaign.
Right. And it was saying, is the gang going to raise your son?
If you go to jail, will the gang raise your child?
Right. And I couldn't for the life of me figure, who the hell is doing this? Where's this coming from? And this brother here, man, he has a program called One Day at a Time Dad, right?
Mm-hmm.
Unbelievable. So what did this do? Did this last incarceration, it build a relationship with your son that of course today I know, because I know you personally, is very, very strong.
Yes.
So what tell us how that happened, how that transpired. Like,
I'll tell you exactly how that happened. So to be clear, I wrote my son a letter to whatever address that I had at that time. I wrote my son a letter once a week for 8.5 years.
Wow, nice.
I never got responses, but this was something that I did.
Right, it was helping you.
Absolutely. And half of the time, the letters were robotic. There were no feeling in them, because I would go years without even consciously thinking about him, because I would have went crazy if I did.
Right.
Trying to figure out what's he doing. No, you can't. You got to get through the time.
Right.
We're not talking me doing 8.5 months or 10 months.
Right.
I have 10 years.
Years, right.
I need to get by and live in reality of the prison life.
Yeah, you can't show no weakness, really.
Yeah. I had no problem with showing vulnerability in prison, but I always knew things could be going great, but when they go wrong, they go wrong.
I get it.
And so I always had that mentality. So when I came home and I became an active part in my son's life, in 2017, so I'm out 2 years at this point. December, I went to pick my son up for Christmas vacation. December 2017. We get back from Georgia. He was living in Georgia at the time.
Okay.
And I was driving back and forth once, twice a month. You know, he would call me. He would be like, Dad, can you come give me a hug? And I would drive down there, give him a hug, drive right back up and get to work.
Wow.
And
wow.
So when I picked him up from Christmas vacation and brought him home for the week, his mom texted me and said that she was tired and to keep him. So I kept him. And I was instantly the primary caregiver.
Brother, hold on for a second. This is a pattern here. This is the same thing that happened in your life.
Yep.
Didn't you say that your parent said that your father said that he couldn't deal with it no more, and he pretty much gave you away, right?
Yes.
And so your kid's mother did the same exact thing.
Though I think the difference is with my child's mom is she did a superb job raising 3 children on her own for years. She needed a break.
Okay.
That's how I understand.
So you didn't blame her. What you did is you manned up and you took the resposibility and said, "It's my turn."
100%.
Man, let me.
100%.
That's dope.
100%.
That's dope.
I don't put any fault on her.
Okay.
Well, I would have probably had already folded. I wasn't even able to stay out to see him being birthed. I mean, so no, yes.
So today you have sole custody of your child?
We have joint custody.
Joint custody.
I have physical custody.
You have physical custody. Okay.
So she still lives in Georgia, and he'll go down there on vacations and things of that nature.
Okay, so it's actually the roles are flipped now. Usually
The
the father.
exact roles are flipped.
Okay.
And so how the campaign ended up getting going was, once my son lived with me, so I'll never forget it. The night that I got that text, I just started crying. Christen was in the other room. I lived in a very small 1-bedroom. And I was just crying because the only thought that I had was that I don't want to fail this boy. Like, that's the only thought that I had.
So that became your mission in life.
Well, the mission is always for me to be the best person I can be, because I believe after that, everything else comes naturally. I don't do anything specifically for my son. I do it for me to be better, to be a better energy field around him. And so what ended up happening was, I called my uncle and aunt, the pastors that I had grew up with, because by now we're very tight. And I was telling them about the text, and I'm like, I don't know what to do. Like, I literally did not know what to do. Being the secondary parent, the give some money here, take them out there.
We're all good at that.
So easy. So easy. I mean, a funny story. I didn't even know that you had to get a physical. I dropped Christen off at the local school and thought that that's how you did it. I didn't know I had to get a physical, register run.
Right.
I mean, that's how much learning I needed to catch up on fast.
You know what? On that note, let's stop for a second. Let's give props, man, to all the real mothers out there that take care of their kids for real and do all of the things that we take for granted.
Yes.
Because it's a hard job. So I want to
add to that, give props to the moms and dads who know when they've reached their limit and provide a successful transition to put their kids in a position of success.
Oh yeah, that's great. That's big.
Yes,
that's
because
big.
that goes overlooked as well.
Right.
And so what ended up happening was after that text, after the phone call with my uncle and aunt, I was just kind of in a daze. Like, I just got hit in the jar and I'm trying to get my bearings back. And so that's when I started the page, The One Day at a Time Dad. It no longer exists now. But I started a page called The One Day at a Time Dad, and I was asking anybody to help me be a parent because I had no clue how to be one.
So that's what your page was about. It was getting advice from other parents.
Absolutely.
And you said it's one day at a time because you're learning.
That was its origin.
That is smart.
That was the origin.
Okay.
And within 6 months, it had like 90,000 followers.
Wow.
Like, I mean, people from all over the place. I mean, but what really helped is that I was so in a place where I was willing to ask for help. I mean, literally, I had a savings that would last me alone as a bachelor for 5 months if I lost my job. When my son moved in, a quarter of that went to his laundry. I didn't even know how much laundry a kid uses.
Right.
My savings was depleted. It got to the point where I had put up a post asking if anybody would let me use their washer and dryer at a discount.
Wow.
Like, I mean, I tear up thinking about this stuff now because I've come so far since then.
Right.
But so I started the page, The One Day at a Time Dad. And what it ended up doing was, throughout this whole process, I was still going back into the neighborhoods and I was talking to young brothers and sisters, and I was linking with dudes from other neighborhoods, from Brockton to Springfield to everywhere, as sort of like a mentoring thing. Just getting the word out. You could be better. You could do this. You're worth that. And I wanted to figure out a way to scale that up. That's when I thought of the posters. So I hung thousands of posters from Springfield, Brockton, Lowell, Lawrence, Boston, and Chelsea. Saying and I was putting them, and the interesting part was everybody that saw them were in a position to see them purposely because I put them where I knew dudes would be.
Right. Yeah, that was very, very smart. That was a genius move on your behalf, definitely.
And what ended up happening was it happened to coincide, and I was totally blind to politics at this time. Very cynical, but it happened to coincide with the DA race that was going on in Boston at that time. So now the candidates are reaching out to me because they notice my signs. They notice everybody noticing my signs.
Right.
I have all these followers. Potentially I could be somebody who could connect them to votes. So I started going to some community meetings, and what I realized is that they had no fucking clue what was actually going on.
Right.
It was all fourth, fifth, sixth hand information. And I wanted to give them direct information about our culture to bring about some real decision-making changes. And the way that I did that was through the listening to learn. So the one day at a time, Dad, and listening to learn have always been connected. Always been connected. And what ended up happening is I started interviewing all of these candidates. And then I started actively campaigning for Rachel Rollins, who currently sits as DA in Suffolk County. But it put me in rooms with people who have power, quote unquote, who don't really know what we need in our neighborhoods. They have data, they have statistics, they have a cousin who might have been to jail, something like that. But, doing 2 years in South Bay is vastly different than doing 10 years in state prison, and it's vastly different than doing life in prison.
So something that you started just in hopes of becoming a better dad,
yes,
allowed you to get in rooms with politicians,
yes,
who needed to hear your story so that they can help give real information and get facts.
100%.
Man, that's beautiful.
Because the reality, what I figured out was, I cannot be a great dad if I don't love your son too. Because your son has the potential to kill my son. So there's a very selfish motive and at the same time a very universal love. Because if I'm just changing myself and my son, but we're still growing up on Humboldt Ave, that's not the change that I want. I want the change to be that kid sees my son, knows he's my son, and doesn't touch my son because he knows he's my son. And not because of fear of what I used to be or represent, but because they truly understand that I'm trying to bring about something good in the long run for us.
Real change.
Real change.
Gotcha.
Change that comes with power.
Wow. So, what would your message be to a younger Christian?
I don't even have a message for him. I would do nothing but listen to him. Nobody ever listened to me, so I would listen to him.
Wow. I love that. That's definitely different and it's very smart.
Because I'll never forget, I'll give you a prime example. I was in 5th grade, but remember, I'm very young because I got double promoted.
Right. You should have been in the
yes.
3rd. Okay.
So I'm in 5th grade, and my teacher was molesting me. And
is this a female teacher?
This was a male teacher.
A male teacher.
And I was molested by men. I was never molested by a woman. I was molested by men. Boys, and I think people need to understand, when we talk about things like this, we're talking about children. At that point, there's no gender involved. These are children that need to be protected, not being protected.
Right.
And I remember I found the guts to tell my dad that I was being touched. And my dad took me to school the next day, and we were in the principal's office, and easily I was able to tell the principal, and this would never happen in this day and age, but they called the teacher into the office. And when the teacher came into the office, so right now I'm about, 10, 11, something like that. Maybe even younger, 9 to 11 or something.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember I started crying uncontrollably. And in my household, you were not allowed to cry.
Okay.
You got hit if you cried, which obviously led to more crying, which
Right.
led to more hitting.
Right.
But when I saw the teacher, I could not stop crying. So my dad started yelling at me, and he was like, well, just say what you just said. You said it 5 times already, just say it. But I couldn't stop crying. And it got to that point. You remember when you were a kid, or you hear kids and you cried to the point you even stop talking?
Mm-hmm.
Like like it's stuck in you, then it comes back out? That's what happened. My dad grabbed me by the ear. He would always twist my ear. He grabbed me by the ear and twisted it so hard that I could only go wherever he twisted it. And he pulled me up and he started walking me out of the office, and he said, the stupid motherfucker must have been lying anyway. And I never forgot that. I never forgot that. That day, that moment, when I got home, and mind you, he made me go back to school the next day like it was normal. When I got home that night, I promised myself I would never talk again.
So as easy as it is for you now to talk about this, after that incident, you got
Totally
became
shut
secluded,
down.
shut down,
I became the mason that built the brick around myself.
and you never told anyone else about that story.
No.
Wow.
Later on, I obviously spoke about it.
Right.
But in that moment, for years, I said,
So that
you know
teacher
what?
ended up getting away scot-free. Like there's nothing.
I
else.
honestly don't know.
Wow.
I honestly
Well, in your
don't know.
situation, though, I mean,
Yes.
from you
Yes.
not telling it.
Yes. Yes.
Damn.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
It's unbelievable.
And so from that moment on, I told myself I would never talk again. I would just shut down completely. And I did. I took on that identity.
How long would you say you were like that?
Probably until 18, when I wrote my aunt that letter. I had never because what ended up happening was I never connected my actions with my past and how I was raised. I always just assumed that God or everybody in the world hated me, so they just wanted to abuse me as much as possible.
Now, they say that, when you come up and abuse is in the picture, most times, more than often, that person becomes an abuser.
Mm-hmm.
Do you do that to your son? Like, do you beat your son, or?
So interesting you should bring that up. And part of my message is cycle breaking.
Mm-hmm.
I always talk about cycle breaking, breaking generational cycles.
Okay.
So my grandfather, but to answer your direct question, no, I don't abuse my son in any way.
Good.
The only thing that I have to adjust to is whatever feelings he took on when I was absent those 8.5 years.
Mm-hmm. Because
he had abandonment issues, trust issues. That's on me.
Right.
I have to work with him through that.
Now, I want to address.
I definitely want to get that point out of your last question, because it's a very important question.
Right.
My grandfather abused his kids in all ways imaginable.
Wow.
My dad abused me a little bit less.
But your dad was physically, right?
Yes, physically, mentally neglectful.
Okay.
Emotionally unavailable, as they would say now, I guess. But he never touched me sexually. Mm-hmm. That came from an outside agent.
Okay.
So already, he's breaking the cycle a little bit, even if I don't see it like that. Even if I just look at him as a fucked up father.
Right.
Fast forward to me and my son. I don't abuse my son at all, but like I said, I missed all those years.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a very, very good chance that should Christian decide to have children, he will be the first generation of absolutely a pure start. That's the goal.
That's a good goal.
That's the goal.
That's a great goal.
Yes, that is the goal.
Now, something that I wanted to talk about, and this is dear to me, because I'm not just gonna praise you being a good father. I have to really let the world know that you're an exceptional father. And reason being is you're not just dealing with a child who no, let me just say it like this. Your child is on the spectrum, correct?
The autism spectrum.
The autism spectrum.
He was diagnosed with PDD-NOS, which, okay, so in the DSM-IV, he was diagnosed with, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, he was diagnosed with pervasive developmental disorder not otherwise specified. So he wasn't necessarily purely autistic. He wasn't necessarily purely Asperger's. He had traits of many of these things, or a few traits from each of them.
Okay.
So it's not otherwise specified. In the DSM-5, the newer version, they just lump it all into autism. So he's on the autism spectrum, but extremely high functioning, which means he will totally live on his own. He can totally be independent.
Great.
Yes.
Great. And so that's why I said exceptional, because a lot of people don't understand that, don't know how to deal with it. And you know, I call you sometimes and ask advice, and I find, brother, first of all, I just want to admit and say to you that I feel like you're a phenomenal man. I know they say, you know, they equate that to phenomenal women, but you are a phenomenal man. You've been through a lot. You've overcame a lot, and you are someone that I definitely have to salute for being a great father, for being a great inspiration, for taking that leap, that to me, you changed so much about you. You didn't change some things. You changed every single thing. And that's why you're the man you are today, which is a man that can be respected. A man that now has, you know, morals, you know, has strong beliefs, who's community based, trying to help his community and change the community. Who really, you're not a talker. You're walking your walk, and
yes,
I so respect that, and I salute you, brother, because it's hard for men as it is to understand themselves,
and that's the key component. So I know brothers that, so first of all, to answer that directly, or just to piggyback off of that, I want it more for myself. I want to know my full capability, my full potential. I want to know, just for my own sake, what am I really capable of? And like, I know brothers that everyone has a different definition of success. And I know some brothers that they've done a lot of time. They come home. For them, success is simply not getting arrested again.
right?
That's a form of success,
Right.
but that's not enough for me.
Right.
I'm not satisfied with that. Other people might be. That's for them. That's fine, but not me.
What makes you satisfied?
I'm not satisfied yet. I'm loving every moment of the journey, but I know as long as I wake up every morning, I can reach a new height. And that's what I try to figure out, what height is that?
Right.
And
That's a great goal.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I am very much becoming like water. Like, I'm just trying to become as fluid as possible, stay as open as possible, because the one thing that I never had growing up was a variety of options. I never had, the options were, in the street life, you do this, or that. You know what comes with that.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like, it's interesting, because even in prison and even on the street, when someone says, so-and-so just violated, there's never the thought of, well, why did they violate?
Right.
Can we talk this? It's only the imagination would only come in how we responded to it. Never could we do something different. Now I'm at a point where my first thought is, can we do something different?
So let me ask you, getting back to the street life,
Yep.
But taking it from where you are today.
Yep.
You're trying to do your best to help these brothers who are active out here to get out of the life and show them something more. Have you had any success with that? Have you been able to reach any of these brothers who are active in the streets, and like, are you mentoring any of them right now?
Yes. So I mean, like I said, that's like asking me if I was stand-up. That's really for them to sort of judge. But I get plenty of inboxes from Boston to Chicago to LA to Watts. I mean, so many different places of people just... I want to be clear. My mental health journey began at 18. I didn't get it until 30.
Right.
So there's no
So it's
doubt
a long
that
journey.
Absolutely.
Right.
Because when you're talking about these life-changing patterns, you're talking about deep research within yourself. So my goal is to present my case to these young men and women. Look, this is what I've been through. This is how I handled it. This is where it got me. But spelling it out in detail, I so disagree with the motivational speakers who are like, I was there, now I'm here. You can do it too.
Right.
No, I was there again. I did a little bit of work in between, went there again, did a little bit more work. Then I was over here a little bit more and only a little bit over there.
Right.
And then finally, now I'm over here.
Right. It definitely takes more
Because the reality is, you're still young, still going through, your brain's still developing, your options are still limited. I want to create in them where they can see options outside of their everyday world.
That makes a lot of sense, brother. That makes a lot of sense. Well, in closing, brother, I would like you to do, I do this with everyone. I pretty much send a message saying that the streets love no one. That's the first thing I want them to understand, right?
The streets love everybody. The streets take everybody, just like prison does. If you're not loved anywhere,
you're loved in
the streets will love you. The question is, what kind of love is it?
I like that. You just put a twist on it, man. I like that. So, on that note, what do you have to say in closing to the young brothers that are out there that are going to see this video, and what kind of inspiration and hope can you give them?
I'll say this to people in general, because it's more than just the young people. We need whole parents. We need whole parents. Most of the people picking up crimes, dying, picking up the gun cases, almost half are 26 and above.
Right. It's not really
We're not,
18,
we're
16.
yeah.
That's
And
true.
it's their sons and it's their fathers who are the sons that are out there. We need whole people. That's my, so when I ever think about, last sort of things, address your mental health. Be brave enough to fail at something new. That's what I would tell them.
I like that. Fail at something new.
Fail at something new.
Man, listen, I want to thank you, man, for your time, brother.
I love these interviews,
This was
man.
a good interview. And I'm sure, man, we were able to reach a lot of people, man. And I can't wait for this to come out because this is powerful. Christen, thanks again, man.
Absolutely, man.
This has been another edition of Real Spit from a Gangsta Gone Legit. Peace.
Peace.